territory, a treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan, parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Some members of the board may be attending the meeting today through video conferencing. I see Councillor Bresciani. If a member of the board wishes to speak, use the raised hand function to be placed in the speaking queue. Everyone else, your button is in front of you. Welcome back to Chambers. I'll just remind those teleconferencing when speaking, unmute your microphone and enable your video camera. Could I have a motion to approve the public agenda? Thank you, Commissioner Bither. Anyone opposed? Carried. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting held on January 5th, 2022? Commissioner Yee, any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. Any opposed? Carried. Our first report, PO 22-5, is tiered policing. Chief, I'm going to ask that you introduce the report as soon as I turn your microphone on.
Great. Thank you very much, and good morning, Mayor Masters and members of our board and anybody else that is joining us here today. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So tiered policing is something that we've had multiple discussions on over the last, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years. I know Councillor Bresciani and I have had discussions probably dating back to about 2017 with the notion of tiered policing, and it comes down to, is there a way that we can deliver police service or police services that uses different categories of police personnel? Essentially, can it be used to save money? Can it be used to create efficiencies? Maybe we can improve service delivery in some cases and ultimately free up resources of police officers to attend to police matters if they're working on something that doesn't necessarily require a police member to do it. And so it's been through those discussions that we've put together this report. So before I turn it over to Inspector Tim Seiferling, who worked with Amy Belfer to author this report, and they'll walk you through the report, I just want to give a little bit more context. Really, it's about providing the service to citizens of our community without using a police officer, and that can be done in a few different ways. One way is civilianization. So could we take a position that has a police officer in the position, and can we put a civilian police member in the position to do it? And I'll use our armorer as an example of that. We have a position within our police service that really facilitates and looks after all of the firearms. That position has been a sworn position up until just a few years ago, where we civilianized it. We brought someone in who's got the skill set and the training and is able to do that job, but is not a sworn police officer. And so that position was civilianized. And so sometimes it means that police powers are not needed in that position. Other times it means that there's specialized training that could be required, and bringing in a civilian person who is trained to do that job might actually be a better fit and more efficient than using a police officer. Another option is special constables or cadets. There's a few different names that you could use, but really what it means is hiring a person who has some police powers, but they are limited, and so you really have to weigh whether or not that is sufficient. Are they going to be working on their own, or will they be working with other police resources? And so I'll use our detention facility as an example. Right now, that's where we use our special constables, and they work with 2 other sworn police officers down there. And so as a result, they're able to, sorry, Gina, you need to
turn off your speakers.
As a result, they're able to rely on those sworn officers should they need to make an arrest, use force, some things that require a police officer with full police powers to be present. So our detention facility is an example of that. And then the third area is partnerships. Sometimes it's not about hiring someone to work at our police service to do the work, but could we partner with another organization to provide the service? And I'll use our PACT officers as an example. It's instead of putting 2 police officers in a car with specialized mental health training, we have a police officer and a mental health professional, and they work together. And perhaps a better example to illustrate this would be hospital wait times. We often talk about the amount of time we spend sitting at a hospital waiting with a patient who is waiting to be seen by a doctor or to be admitted into the hospital. Rather than looking at hiring someone to work for the police service to sit with the the people at the hospital? Could we form a partnership with security at the hospital, for example, and give them the authority to sit with those patients? And that way it's not added payroll for the Regina Police Service, but really partnering to try and find a solution to the problem. Various models exist across Canada, and Tim will be able to describe that to you in this report. And I can tell you that our police service has numerous examples of alternative service delivery, civilianization, automation, and partnerships that have been enhanced over the years, and we'll be happy to discuss it further after the report. So with that, I will turn it over to Inspector Seiferling to walk us through this report.
Good morning, Mayor Masters, members of the board. Thank you for the introduction, Chief Bray. This report, a lot of the routes, and some of us were able to attend virtually with the tiered policing report from the York Regional Police, and Paul McSween will see, or sorry, Chief McSween and Paul McKenna will see some similar type of themes within this report, and how important it is for us leaders to look at efficiencies if we're talking about tiered policing or layered policing or modernization policing, or however you would like to label it. So one of the big things is, what's tiered policing? It's defined as a policing strategy that mixes conventional police officers with other service providers, such as police officers with limited powers, special constables, private security, civilians, volunteers, and community partners. And Chief Bray hit a lot of those topics already in his introduction on that. The primary goal of the tiered policing is to explore ways police can become more effective and efficient by exploring which police functions could be done by alternative service providers. And McKenna, what part of our presentation was, he suggests that police leaders should explore 4 questions. And I would say that the 4 questions, which are on page 2 there: who does what powers are required, who else could do this, and why do this? Now, these questions here, I mean, we can apply them to policing and the modernization of policing, but I would say that anybody in any organization, in any team, you're looking at efficiencies. In business, you're looking at the same types of questions that you can be asking yourself with that one, and that's the same things that we do ask ourselves as leaders within the police service and within the city. The increasing cost of policing provides services in communities across the country and beyond has created important discussions about how governing bodies can mitigate costs without reducing service. And one of the important things that Chief McSween had talked about in his presentation to us was that we're not necessarily looking at the cost, but we're looking about efficiency and how the key to modernization of policing is. The risk is, if we're designing roles within our police service that limit the abilities of the police officers, that can become a little bit dangerous on there. We need the flexibility. What we need, we have the opportunities for officers who require to be in a position to have that ability, that flexibility, that they can have meaningful work, right? And you'll see later on in the report, I refer to a couple of different things that the York Regional Police have implemented, which is similar to what the Regina Police has implemented with frontline support officers, where we have to put officers into certain positions because of accommodations, right? So it's important that if we limit that to a certain level of police officer, we still need other officers to perhaps fill that. So in the Regina Police Service, when you look at modernization of policing, you can look at, there's a model over on page 2, about the middle of the page, where we talk about the conventional police model, where we talk about regular police officers make up about 85% of us, and then non-sworn are about that 15%. But when you look at the tiered model, right, not only with policing, but within the community itself, different areas within that, when we talk about public safety officers or civilianization of policing or private security or regular officers, you could even dive down farther into that, and you can look at tiers within the tiers itself, right? And you'll see within the report, and when we get into questions, that there are tiers within that we took, and we look at efficiencies within there. So when we look at just even going through the tiered policing model, with the regular police officers making 60%, with Regina, we're at 30% civilianization. Our regular policing right now, when you look at the tiering within there, we have uniform division, we have school resource officers, we have community engagement, we have within our ISD sections and SSD sections, we have detective. We have the ability to have experts in various fields. We've seen that in presentations over the years. with regards to if it's a vice section or if it's a robbery section or major crime section, we have expertise. Now, we don't need major crime officers attending to a call for service, right, a break and enter, but they do have an expertise in a certain area. We have break and enter people that can, or officers that can go to a break and enter, and we have other people in other areas. So we end up having a tiered response with that. When we look at community support officers, we can look at partnerships, and the chief had talked about how important it is to have partnerships within the city, within the province. Well, we have the Provincial Capital Commission. They utilize community safety officers to perform enforcement of bylaws and statutes and certain laws. The community safety officers are available to investigate and or assist with Mental Health Act investigations, alcohol and gaming regulation offenses, and minor criminal code offenses. And we work hand in hand with them. We have the ability to communicate with them through our dispatch. They can go and attend to an incident that's happening and either handle it or go back and call for some assistance from us or have the proper approach and a proper level of response on that. When we look at a civil policing, right, you look at the Regina Police Service, and approximately 32 years ago, we started civilization with regards to our communication center. At one point, that was all police officers. In 1990 and up to about 1995, that civilization in that unit ended up taking sworn police officers who have an expertise in one area and bringing civilian members in there to be able to answer calls. And that civilization goes through, and you can see where we start having a tiered response within their communication center, where we start going into 2010, in 2000 and then 2011, we start tiering our responses within there by entering into direct entry officers who are able to take lower priority reports, not lower importance, but lower priority, and having a different skill set in there. So our 911 operators and people taking those important calls now can focus on there, which mitigates risk, right? We don't need them juggling a bunch of information. They can focus on one thing. We have frontline officers and front desk officers taking certain calls for service. Well, we can have a better customer service and more efficiency by having those people come and be able to go to essentially a professional who's able to take that information and provide them with feedback and direction. That online reporting I was mentioning was introduced in 2011, right? Not only does it help with customer service when it comes to people being able to be served efficiently, our partners at the Regina Fire Department can report, when we do arson investigations, they can do their online reporting on there and saves a lot of time with that. DEVR was tasked to expand service delivery to allow for public reports types of offenses without needing the assistance of sworn police officers. And this was part of COVID-19 about in 2020 when we were having service delivery, and we didn't want to have a major impact in our service delivery. DEVR was responsible for completing approximately 11,000 reports for a variety of offenses such as mischief, missing persons, and thefts. This flexibility and the adaptability of DEVR has provided a service that has proven to be successful for an alternative service delivery model. So you can see that's that example of when you go back to those questions that we talked about before, who's doing what, why are they doing it, who else can do it. Those are some of those things where we're saying, okay, can we do something better, and how do we implement that? And there's another prime example of that. Right now with the Regina Police Service, we were able to civilianize 14 sworn positions without an interruption of service to the public. Currently, civilian police employees at the Regina Police Service occupy several roles, including positions in evidence management, court documentation, call response, crime analysis, intelligence operations analysis, policy, planning, research, and I go on. So a number of different places, right? We can go into media, tech crime, finance, human resources, asset management, fleet services and facilities, right? So it's a major, major impact on the Regina Police Service. We can look at 2016 and 2018 when we talk about the patrol workload assessments and operational reviews, right? So we look at, and it's proven that we'll go and we'll be able to look at our service and have the ability to look at efficiencies within that service. We look at 2015, for example, we had 8 positions in there. We're the strategic services manager, human resources manager, tactical crime analyst, tech crime. So we had a number of positions that were taken over. The corporals were changed to special constables at that point, right? When we were looking at that for cost savings, they're about $341,000. In 2016, we had 2 positions, right? The armorer, which the chief had mentioned, and policy development, right? We had those ones, cost savings of about $54,000. And in 2018, you notice that we had 4 positions, were 4 court documentation clerks. Now, you look at that, there wasn't a cost savings per se, but then when you look at risk mitigation, right? It's such an important part of that. I worked in the detention unit as a special constable, and you think of all the risk that comes in when we come down to our detention area when it comes to processing and safety and treatment of people as they come down, right? There's a lot of stress that can then happen in that area. And then when you look at the paperwork that also has to be done and goes to court, there's a lot of things that happen. So when you're looking at court documentation clerks, you can see where it's important. The cost savings isn't there, but the quality of the service to the public is increased. The private security section, McKenna talks about that, and we take into consideration, right? We can look at the Regina Police Service. If you come in our front doors, you're met with a commissionaire, right? Private security, right? We don't need a sworn police officer to sit it there. There is a cost savings. You can see that directly on that, right? We use them as a watch commander. I know when we had crime scenes, we would call commissionaires out to come in, depending on the seriousness of the scene, but we would have them to come out, which would be a cost savings. So we're always constantly looking for efficiencies that can free up time, right? Because again, going back to that presentation with McSween, it's about creating the efficiencies, creating the time, right, for our officers to be able to go out and have that meaningful work within their calls or their duties. University of Regina Campus Security, another example of good private security. When we come there, they talk about having 16 officers who work with teams of 4. They follow the same shift pattern as Regina Police Service, right? So one of their members are going to work as a dispatcher, and they have communication with us as a Regina Police Service. They can communicate directly with ours. They'll attend certain calls and include suspicious people, 911 hang-up, citizens, noise complaint, domestic disputes in residence. Officers will assess the situation and, if required, assist the Regina Police Service. They can also call in their community safety officers with that. So I had a great conversation with the supervisor with the PCC, Daryl, and he talked about that relationship, right, and how it ebbs and flows and who can go to what calls for service and the communication. It's fantastic when you look at it as, you know, maybe most people may not know about how that relationship works, but it really works smoothly. Lindsay from the Downtown Business Improvement District, had a great conversation with her. I mean, this was a program that was bought in by the City of Regina, and should be very proud of this. We're launching the Community Support Program, right? And Lindsay says on this one here, workers are in teams of 7 civilians whose duties include foot circuits in the downtown and warehouse districts. They're working with community organizations to provide food, shelter, healthcare, risk prevention, harm reduction, crisis counseling to people who are in need. The workers travel in pairs, connect with vulnerable community members affected by mental health, addictions, homelessness. Their goal is to support vulnerable community members throughout the outreach and advocacy, such as making phone calls, completing paperwork, or helping members of the public assess services. The members also receive phone calls from business members, the Regina Police Service, and self-referrals. So you see that importance, right? So it's partnerships within our community, right? A great program that's brought in by the City of Regina to have impact within our community and bring safety to the people in our downtown and warehouse districts, right? Important for us, important for business. Chief had mentioned within our service, the use of special constables, right? In our detention area, we have 4 special constables, right? When you look at our technological crime technician, right? I used to work in tech crime, right? And that was one of the questions that was always asked was, does it have to be a sworn member in there for certain things it has to? But when we grow that unit, definitely having a civilian member in there with some special constable status for certain duties is important to be able to have in there. Our armor switched to a civilian member, which was important. And we have 3 traffic clerks that have to be special constables just for certain abilities when it comes to issuing tickets. When we look at service delivery alternatives in 2019, the frontline support, so I'll go down in a couple of pages. We'll talk about other models within just a kind of a little examples within Canada. We can't go across and go through every example in Canada, but our frontline support, if you look at that frontline support model that we have, that call diversion unit sounds very similar to what we're having on there. So a frontline support unit that was implemented by the Regina Police Service. Members working in this unit are able to assist the frontline members in gathering evidence and writing reports and talking to victims. They're fully trained officers, but unforeseen circumstances, right, are requiring, right? They might be rehabbing an injury. They might need some light duties accommodations on that. But again, it comes back to what Chief McSween said when we were on our webinar, meaningful work for people who need it, right? So if we have certain areas that we have officers that are not having that ability, we're kind of putting ourselves in a bad spot where we have now ability to have these people have meaningful work that we're able to help out with the front line. Again, efficiencies within there, better customer service for people who are especially reporting crimes. Chief already mentioned, I'm not going to get into it, but the PAC team, right? We're aware of it. Chief had mentioned that relationship and working with the health district, that's extremely important. Another one that's really important is the hub table team, right? So this is the ability to share that information from various government ministries and community agencies, meet in a weekly to address specific situations involving individuals and or families who have significant probability of experiencing harm, right? So these teams can work together, they can wrap around and develop immediate, coordinated, and integrated responses by mobilizing existing resources. Again, another example of the police working as a tiered approach, as a layered approach, modern approach to when we're going and able to give service delivery on that. Another area within the Regina Police Service that we look at and we're very proud of is the Service Delivery Committee, right, chaired by Superintendent Cook. We have ability here, we have sworn civilian members on that, frontline employees and managers, which meet on a regularly throughout the year, right? And that goal of the committee is to really go back and ask those same questions, right? Why are we doing certain things and can we do it better, right? The goal of the committee is to identify any possible challenges to service, opportunities for improvement, right? And right now we're actually working on practices related to break and enter offenses and determine if there's an alternative response to the current practice on that. So again, we're always constantly working, we're always constantly pushing, we're always trying to challenge ourselves as a service to see if we can do things better. We're talking about the Canadian examples. Now you can research it and there's tons of examples across Canada, across the world about policing and alternatives and modernization, but there's a couple here that I quote in the report in here. The Saskatoon Police Service has created an alternative response, an RO who's a sworn police officer under the Provincial Community Safety Framework. When we look at that, they have certain tasks, right? Again, they do downtown beats. They carry only certain types of uses of force options, right? They have certain things that they are able to do in duties. And even doing the research, they, for example, they can pull a speed automated trailer somewhere. They can do stuff. But we have to be, when we're analyzing what other agencies do, and this is the job as leaders, is to say, do we have something right now in function that can mimic what's happening there? So for us in Regina, right, if we, like talking about moving a speed enforcement trailer for, to monitor speed, we have fleet services, right? We have a civilian member who can hook up that item and move it out to a location that we need, where these officers might be able to do that. We have other options, so we're not comparing apples to apples really when it comes to certain abilities, right? Because all services are made up and comprised of different people. Edmonton Police Service launched a human-centered engagement liaison, or HELP, partnered in 2021. The partnership is a social navigation program committed to help people experiencing homelessness and poverty transition towards maintaining sustainable health lifestyles. The partnership between the Edmonton Police Service, social services, and the government, the non-government agencies, they work together to solve problems for people, right? And again, really important, but when you start listening to, like, we have PACT, we have HUB, we have a lot of things that are able to go and mimic a lot of the things that are happening with these other programs in other cities. Call diversion, I'm not going to get into it, but if we were on that York Regional Police, they did their analysis asking those questions again, what can we do and what can we do better? York Regional Police brought in the call diversion unit, right? We had a frontline support unit, it was similar to the type of service that they provide and efficiencies that they provide for their stuff. Again, giving meaningful work to people who need it, officers who are rehabbing, and we're able to really look at call levels of service on that one. And Winnipeg Police Service, another example, right? They have the Auxiliary Cadet Program, special constables who are members of the Regina Police, the Winnipeg Police Association, officers working in pairs, walking the beat, right? So they, again, do certain things. Again, that sounds a lot like our community safety officers that are down there, our workers that are down in, that were hired for our program in Regina bid, right? And our beat officers that we have. So a lot of the things where you're comparing, a lot of examples do have overlap within our organization and within our city itself. As the chief had mentioned before, our considerations, right, we have to really look at when we're hiring, especially when we're hiring, no matter if it's a special constable, whether you still go through the same hiring process, and there's a lot of pressures within the Regina Police Service, right, to hire qualified applicants, and they meet it. So sometimes that cost savings isn't necessarily, if we're looking, okay, can we hire a special constable instead of a sworn police officer? Yeah, you do save some money financially on that, but you can hire 5 special constables that maybe have limited capacity, limited duties, that can only go into certain locations, where you can hire 4 sworn officers that I have the ability to be able to send to any type of call for service or handle any type of incident that's happening. So that's important. The cost savings is not a guaranteed result of tier policing strategies, right? Hiring a civilian with specialized skills results in little to no cost savings, but provides better service, right? The chief had mentioned that. Innovation alleviates frontline officer time. Utilizing special constables to assist in minor offenses and response cost savings, but retaining those members may also be difficult, right? Because a lot of times I was a special constable in cells, right? That was a stepping stone for me to become a sworn member, right? So even if you look at that, there's a lot of training. If there's a revolving door of people coming in, you're going to still have efficiencies that aren't necessarily met because you're constantly having to train somebody. There is a cost savings with that, but there's still efficiencies that are changed on that. And really, when you look at it, if you have a 5-year within our service, if you have a 5-year constable versus a 5-year special, the cost savings really isn't as great as some people might think. So really, at the end of the day, when you look at the report and that's submitted in the research that's there, again, it comes down to efficiencies within the service and really being good leaders and asking what we can do and how we can really do it better. And is there a bit different way of doing that? Right, and I know we're committed here. I'm on the service delivery team, the committee that's reviewing how we can do things better. I know we have a commitment to be able to research and look at better ways of doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector Seiferling. I will open it up to members of the commission for questions on the report. In case you forget, you push the button in front of you on your speaker and I'll know you want to talk. It's been a while. No questions for a receive and file report? Oh,
Mayor
Councillor-
Masters, my hand is up.
There you go, Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Inspector Seiferling for that report and to the chief for his comments as well. So I want to just start by asking a couple questions in regards to what is the actual salary? You said there's could be not a lot of savings. What is the base salary for the special constables compared to an officer? Through the chair?
Yeah, I can say it ranges from about $5,000 to about $17,000 depending on what year it is. I know the cost savings, so based on our contract right now, if you compare a 5th year, I'll use 5th year and 5th year, I think it was $96,000 for a 5th year special constable versus 110, 112-ish. So you're at about a little bit of a savings. And that's where it comes down to a 5 for 4. So if you hired 5 special constables, you could have 1, but again, it comes back into that, the abilities of what those officers were able to do with it.
Thank you. Do we research to see, or are we bound through any legislation as to what we can pay these special officers? When I read through one of the reports from another police service, they said the special constables, and they maybe had a different title, but was about $25 an hour, and the police was $50, kind of that range, half. What you're telling me is different. So are we, is there an opportunity to, depending on what the need is or what the salary, does it have to, are we bound by any legislation?
Thanks, Councillor. What I would say is it depends what we're going to ask them to do. I'm speaking in very broad generic terms, but if we're going to put them in any form of a uniform and put any form of use of force tools on their waist, minus perhaps a firearm, the chances are good you're going to be paying between 70 and 85% of a police officer's wage. There's a ton of training that goes into use of force. There's a lot of different things. Could you pay 50% of a police officer's wage if you had no use of force tools on their belt? I think you could. I absolutely think you could, and our downtown community support team is a good example of that. And so it really comes into, if we're looking to explore models where it's not police officers doing it, it's essentially civilian personnel who have no use of force. I know our downtown community support team gets some, for lack of a better term, verbal judo training, how to interact with challenging customers, those types of things, but not use of force training. I think then the question comes, should it be the police service that's hiring them? Or should it be a different part of the community or a different organization that we partner with? So if I'm answering your question, and I'm hoping I'm giving you a direct enough answer, Councillor, is yes, I believe you could hire someone at 50% of the wage of a police officer, but you're likely not going to be asking them to do any duties that are remotely similar to policing, certainly ones that would engage in any sort of potential force or use of force situation.
Thank you. So have we, as an organization, gone out to any other jurisdictions to see kind of what the salaries are with added, like I guess our salaries, are they comparative to other police services? So I guess if they don't have a handgun and they are strictly doing similar to what Saskatoon is doing with the 4 they have hired, have we done any research there?
Yes, we have done research there, using the Saskatoon program as an example, that's my 80-20 example. You're going to pay them 80% of a first-class constable's wage, and you're going to get about 20%, maybe up to 30 or 35% of what those officers could do. So they're very limited in their powers and their abilities, but the cost savings is not that significant. Saskatoon also has special constable status for its comm center workers. So anyone that works in their communication center is designated as a special constable. They wear uniforms, however, they don't obviously need use of force training. But I also know that they are up at around 80-85% of a first-class constable, but not resources that could be deployed anywhere else other than in the comm center, because they haven't received the training, the police training, they haven't gone through all of the qualifications for that, and wouldn't be able to be used or adapted anywhere else other than in that communication center. In terms of elsewhere in Canada, absolutely, and I think the best example I could give you is the Winnipeg example. Those downtown ambassadors started out as that, downtown ambassadors. The city of Winnipeg hired about 100 or 120 people to essentially try and do what our community support workers were doing. Over time, they were absorbed into the Winnipeg Police Service. I was a member, president of our police association at the time that happened, and they basically changed their duties from being more cargo pants and a golf shirt to uniformed with limited use of force options, and we're back to that 80%. They're paid about 80% of the Winnipeg first-class constables, however, could be deployed very few other places other than just in that downtown area where they do their work, and there's a significant number of them. There's over 100 that still work in downtown Winnipeg. So it's a tough conversation because, and I say this, Councillor, I know you and I have had this conversation many times. It's the efficiencies are not quite as significant as you would think when you're hiring people that you're wanting to do some police duties, but not all. You're better off to find efficiencies to hire people to do have no police duties. It's more of those social navigators, if you will, and Edmonton, for example, has gone to that. Regina's got some community support workers. in my view, any of the exploration that we've done, any of the research that we've done shows that if you can hire people that don't wear uniforms and don't have any use of force options on their belt, there is likely going to be a significant cost saving, and there's no blurring of the line, and often retention isn't the same issue either. As Inspector Seiferling talked about, our special constables are constantly using that as a stepping stone to become a police officer, and so that retention can be a real challenge.
Thank you for that. Some of us had attended a webinar through the York Regional Police, and that was through Chief Jim McSween and Inspector Tim Skinner, and that was done in August. The outcome there, they had talked about how they had changed the organization. They had to change the whole culture almost of thinking of how they looked at tiered policing. And, as Inspector Seiferling has mentioned a few of the things, the models that they've used. And I think we as Regina Police Service are using some of those, doing some of the things that they're doing, and maybe more of some others. But I want to ask that, how many staff do we have that are civilian that were police officers that are not police officers that actually started, like we've seen police officers that have gone to be civilians. But I'm wondering about when we talk about civilians within, and if it be an officer, a lower paid officer, we get into the conversation about how do we stop doing some things and alleviate to this lower constable to give some time to the other constables who are they're paid to do the big work. And I'm going to use engagement as one element of it. Again, do we need to have an officer that's making $150,000 going to do engagement pieces? Like, these are some of the things, but when you said exploration, have we really explored it holistically from the whole service to move in some of these directions as to, well, maybe there is a portion that they don't need to be having, they don't need to be armed. Like, those are the conversations, and they were tough conversations to have with their police service, but they knew they had to start somewhere. Is that something that, you can look at? Because I'm kind of getting the feeling that you're saying, well, we've kind of done everything we can't do any more. I guess I would just like your thoughts on, and have you reached out, I guess, to the York Police Service to see how they've got theirs started through the chair?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'll try and answer this in a couple of ways. I'll start off by saying you're right. I don't know that right now we have any apparent opportunities for advancing a lower tier service response than we've already explored. But I will say that we're constantly open, alert, and alive to it. In fact, I would say that every year when we go through our budget process, we do that. Last year's budget civilianized a job in our human resource area, and again, deployed that police officer by doing that back into an operational police position. And so we have always to have our eyes open and look for ways that we can do it. I'm not convinced that there is a bunch of opportunity right now. With regard to engagement, community engagement, so we have a community engagement unit that has 4 constables in it. That's not a lot of constables, and those constables, when COVID hit, were redeployed to the front line. So those constables, like our cultural unit, which has 1 constable in it, was redeployed into a police car on the front line. If we put non-police civilian personnel in those roles, there could be a cost savings, especially if we're not putting any use of force options on their waist and we're not asking them to wear a police uniform. But there's 2 challenges with that. Number 1, we're limited in where we can use them. They would be life working people that would be working in that community engagement position. And number 2, most organizations that we interact with, whether they be youth-based organizations, community-based organizations, they want a police officer there. They don't want a civilian member of the police service if it's reading with children, if it's giving crime prevention advice, which that unit does often, if it's working with youth groups in the community or groups that help people that are disadvantaged. Often by our involvement, they're looking for the police perspective. They already have partners or employees that are civilians that are not police, and so they're looking for others. So it's a very small number of people in community engagement, and if we civilianize them, I again don't know that we would get the same result. In fact, I would suggest we would still likely be having the need to have a couple of police officers in there at the least. So, you know, it's one of those conversations. When we brought this report forward, we explored other locations in Canada and what they've done different than us. And then we look at the service that they're providing and we determine, are we doing that already in an alternate way? And Tim gave the example of taking traffic control devices out. We don't use police officers for that, nor did York or any other place. They found a way they could civilianize it. We have maintenance or garage personnel that will do that work for us. We hire commissionaires to sit on crime scenes where some other communities hire individuals to work within their organization that are lower paid to sit on crime scenes. The front desk example Tim gave as well. So there are lots of, I think there was an example on that, if I'm not mistaken, on that tiered policing presentation where they were doing some sort of delivery of food to prisoners. Well, we don't have that as something that we do. The food delivery happens right in our detention unit. So that wasn't necessarily one that we could use as an example that translated to here. So, you know, we look at this, we talk about this on a regular basis. There's a real cost-benefit analysis that has to go into. It may look appealing to hire someone at a percentage lower wage, but when you understand what the limitations are that come with that and potentially the risk and liability that comes with it, it isn't always an easy alternative. We have done some substantial civilianization, especially even in the last, I'm going to say, decade, that has allowed us to free up a number of police officers to get them back on the street. We also did recently, that report was directly done for the board, where we talked about the calls that the community might think we don't need police to go to. We did an analysis of those calls. So we took out the break-and-enters, the homicides, the traffic accidents, which most people would expect you need a police officer to go to that call. And we just analyzed the assist citizens, the suicide in progress, all of those, mental health, all of those types of calls. And after we did our analysis with a series of questions that we asked, 97% of the time, a police response was required. What was needed, though, was a way to transition that and help those individuals in a better way rather than having police sit with them or transport them to a detention unit or an emergency ward. And so that, to me, is the big area where there's room for work. And I'm still not convinced that our police service hiring people to do that work is as beneficial as finding ways to work with partners and leverage their resources to do that work without inflating the police budget, to take on responsibility that isn't necessarily ours. So maybe I'll stop there, Councillor. I've probably added about 5 more questions to your list.
It's okay. I want to say this in the last, for the new members on council or on the commission, I would absolutely agree that, when we were in tight situations and I believe still understaffed, that, we, Chief, you and staff did deploy staff to the front lines when we were in crisis. So I guess the point, though, is that I'm not sure it's sustainable how we're moving forward, and I think that's the worry. And that's when I met with you back in, I think, 17 or 18, we talked about this. Toronto did a big thing. We're seeing it across, the country, where people are looking at in ways of using tiered, as we are as well in some capacity. But I am going to ask that I do think that it's important that we do our due diligence to look at ways to find savings. And if it's not just savings, though, It's about alleviating officers who are highly trained, not to be going to a break and enter, or just to take a report, or to wait at the hospital, or wait in a courtroom. I think these are the things that have been frustrating for many, many years, and I think it's time that we actually look at it. The other piece to it is we've got a gap in hiring, if it's our culture or Indigenous. I think this is could be another gateway that we look at this. And so I would like, and I do have a motion that I'd like to put forward if possible. Elaine, do you have it there? And I sent it.
Yes, I have it.
Okay, so I can just explain what I'd like to have. That I would like the Regina Police Service to prepare a report and I'll ask the chief if the time frame is okay, for Q3 of 2022 on the use of the, similar to Saskatoon, alternative response officers. And I'm also going to, and it's not limited to that, it could be also special constables and other service providers as appropriate, in an effort to reduce overtime and other labor expenses and to free up resources for frontline duties that required conventional sworn officers. And I'm not sure if that's enough time, Chief, but I would just ask you if you could respond to the timing of that.
Councillor Bresciani, it's Mayor Masters here. You want a report different than the report we currently have on tiered policing to specifically focus on the use of alternate response officers?
No, not the use. I want the recommendation of where we can hire response officers. So I'm asking them to dive down to look to see, similar to Saskatoon. Saskatoon has done a pilot project. They should be up. It should be actually, they did a one-year pilot project. It would be good to, I guess we could follow up with that as well. But I'm asking that we actually look for options to use the alternative response officers or increase more special constables. And I'm sorry, Elaine, if you could just add in there, you can title it what you want, but special constables as well. So, Mayor Masters, to your point, the report is here, and the work that Regina Police Service has done so far to date, I absolutely appreciate. And they've done a lot of work. But I don't think we should stop there. I believe that we need to look at this holistically within our organization to see where else we can find officers, if it be special constables or if it can be very similar to Saskatoon, the alternative response officers. And if it's doing, some have used traffic, some have used, like there's certain, and I'm not an expert, but what I am asking is that report come back to consider having similar to, and if it has to be, a pilot, I guess that could be part of the report that does come back. Thank you. And I'll ask any other questions.
Councillor Bresciani, just one moment. We're just having Elaine.
Thank you, Elaine.
Councillor Bresciani, can you see the motion?
No, I can't, but I sent it to you. Oh, I can now.
So are you looking more for, and again, just looking to understand, you're looking for basically a supplemental report to dive into the cost-benefit analysis or the feedback on the pilot project on alternative response officers and special constables?
I'm sorry, repeat that. Sorry, Mayor Masters.
You're looking, for the report you're looking at is almost supplemental to this one, where you would like information back on the pilot project from the AROs out of Saskatoon and the use of special constables? You want a cost-benefit analysis from, Chief?
I never included that in this at all. You can add that, but I'm asking that we go back and look for opportunities for the use of alternative response officers and or special constables. And that could be part of the data that they come back with in this report.
Chief, you want to comment?
Yeah, I don't, so we can do the report, and it's possible to have it done by the end of quarter 3. I'll start with that. I don't believe that we're going to find much, if anything, and if we do find an area where we could use them, then I think we have to be able to make sure that we're not limiting ourselves somewhere else. So the use of alternative response officers who are not full police officers, for example, to take lower level reports. I believe that we do that now, not only through the comm center, but we're one of the only police services in Canada that has direct entry victim reporting. So people can call in, report on the phone, and if the report comes in, if Andrew calls in to report something, a break-in and enter to his garage, and there's follow-up investigation to do, it will be assigned to a police officer, but that initial report was taken over the phone by a civilian. Same with responding. There's a lot of work, and Tim talked about this, by using members that are in an accommodation. Maybe they've got a broken leg or they're in some sort of accommodated duties. We can give them work to do. A lot of it is follow-up phone work without having them to go out and actually physically interact with the public. So we can put a report together on this, and we can provide some more numbers. We do have some numbers from Saskatoon with their alternative response program, but I think it's going to tell you what I've already told you, and that's that you're going to get 20 to 30% of the work done for about 80% of the cost. And I'm generalizing, but that's why I don't feel like we have an abundance of areas where we could deploy such work. I'll use traffic example as an example, because I know Councillor Bresciani, you and I have talked about this in the past. Alberta started a program called the Sheriff's Program, which was really to have officers out on the highways, stopping vehicles, writing traffic tickets, doing traffic enforcement, but they didn't have full police powers. And so what happened was, if they pulled a vehicle over and that vehicle had a gun in it that needed seizing, the driver had a warrant, there were drugs found in the vehicle, any of those types of things happened, they wouldn't be able to handle it themselves. They would have to call the nearest, whether it's municipal or RCMP jurisdiction, to come and give them a hand. After 5 years, they transformed them to be full-fledged police officers, because traffic interactions inevitably require an abundance of different police powers, tools, and techniques, and can't be done by someone who has very limited capacity. Otherwise, you're going to be calling other officers to assist that person the whole time. And so traffic, as an example, is not an area, although on the face of it, it may look like you're just writing tickets. Why don't we just hire commissionaires to go out and do that? But our traffic stops yield a whole bunch of other challenges that you need a full-fledged police officer, and benefit from having a full police officer out there handling those. So long-winded, Mayor, I know, but I'm going to say we can do the report by the end of quarter 3. But I'm not convinced that I'm going to come back with abundance of recommendations of where we can save money. I think I'm going to just do a better job of explaining that I feel we're as efficient as we could be. We'll continue to look for efficiencies, but I'm just not convinced that there's a bunch of opportunities that we're missing out there.
Mayor Masters, can I respond, or do I have to wait till the end?
No, you go ahead, Councillor Bresciani, if you like. I haven't opened it up to the rest of
So
the commission yet.
I just wanted to ask the chief, though, with the response that comes back from Saskatoon, can we now take an opportunity to learn from that, use their data, and see how we could make ours better? Like, that's what I'm asking for. Like, it's somewhat innovative to say, and I think we've done, I absolutely know we've done lots. But I will go back to this point. I've talked for many years about the Indigenous hiring, and so we know North Central, when we go there, to have some of these you want to call them special constables, in that way where they can relate and people can see them as role models, and there's so much value to that, and I'm struggling when we just say, well, we've done all we can. I think there's always more we can do, and I think we need to be open to that. And I kind of got that from York Police. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I do think that it's a time that we need to start thinking outside the box a little bit more. And I know it's maybe pushing. We're going to get pushback from maybe the police union, but I do think that there is some value in that. And I'm not at risk to risk safety for sure. But I think there is a piece there that we're missing. So I'll just add that in there. I'll let others ask questions. I see hands up.
To members of the commission, you are speaking to leave the motion up, please. I already know where hand is at. You are speaking to the motion, not to the main report. And so if you have questions with regards to Councillor Bresciani's motion, we'll take those questions for either Chief or Councillor Bresciani now. Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. So what I'm hearing in terms of the responses is that we can't address the complex issues in the community by replacing higher cost sworn officers with cheap labor. And I respect that, and I think that's important. And you're saying that we've civilianized, we've looked for ways of dealing with important operational concerns with civilians and other measures. So we've kind of tapped out those options. I'm also hearing from Commissioner Bresciani that we're looking for a couple of other things. So to make this kind of report valuable, I'm wondering if perhaps then we could do a few things. One is, could you comment in this report on the coordination that exists or should exist between the various policing and non-policing entities identified in this report? So for instance, we've talked about the community support program here. Great, and by the way, it's a great report. We've talked about mobile crisis. We've talked about a number of other non-policing agencies. Could this report include a strategy for how we coordinate and work together? So it makes sense to people why the police would show up to a call for service, or why it would make sense to dispatch, for instance, the community support program instead. So I think what we need at the city, both at the policing level as well as the city proper, is actually figuring out how these different entities work together. Could that be something you explore in this report to basically push forward what you've identified in this report before us now?
Yes, so I do think so. I think that's going to be a lot of the work we do in the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. I feel like that's what we're going to talk about, is how can we coordinate? How can we integrate? How can we cooperate on calls where we may be the first response, but then that follow-up response and further follow-up connection and response is needed, and isn't necessarily needed from policing. So so I can include that in there, and I think that's a pretty broad scope, because there's I don't want to say unending, but there's a lot of different ways in which we work with community partners, and so a strategy on how we coordinate with regard to youth in challenging situations might look different than mental health, might look different than other social challenges. But I do think that's going to be a lot of the work from the community well-being work that's going on, and we have very, very invested interest in that. We've got people on that committee, so and the timing may coordinate with that, and it may make sense to get that report.
No, it won't.
No.
And again, you're going to talk about them working in a silo on this, and an entire entity and 6 community action tables working on it at the same time. So if you're prepared to wait, not Q3, perhaps sometimes into the early part of 2023, I think the commission, because we have members of police service, we send out the call and they're attending all of these summits, which then create the community action tables. They're going to sit on the safety table, if not other tables, and so that in the scheduling of things isn't going to hit Q3 of 2022 in terms of a strategy and coordination. But I can tell you of the summits we've held so far is that coordination and collaboration and that strategy on either centralized intake or the sharing of information as to who's got what and who's doing what with whom is core to everything that every group that we have in a room is talking about. So if you're okay waiting that and removing that from the ARO and special constable piece, I think you're going to get it, essentially.
Just later. All right, thank you. The follow-up question, and this seems to be front and center in Commissioner Bresciani's point, is the overtime expenses, which we've talked about. I know there's a policy and a process that governs that. What I'm hearing from Commissioner Bresciani is we're looking for a way of reducing those costs. Perhaps we could frame this report in a different way, which how do we bring those costs down? And could the RPS provide a variety of alternatives? And if none of them work, they don't work. But I think that's what I'm hearing from Commissioner Bresciani. Would that be feasible to include in this report as a standalone item? How do we govern overtime? And secondly, how can we reduce those costs? And here are some different avenues. Is that sound, and does that make sense for this report?
So what I would say to that is that we have brought forward a few times overtime management reports, and it probably doesn't necessarily hit everybody on. We've got some newer members on the board, but over the last, I'm going to say 5-6 years, I think we've brought forward an overtime report 3 times where we talk about where is overtime incurred, how is it decided upon, what do we do to manage it and try and work within a budget on that, and what are some unexpected things that cause us to be challenged when it comes to managing overtime. So, you know, to me, that almost is a separate report, and maybe there's a way we can revive it with a lens on it to look at what are some alternate ways that we can manage the overtime if we were using other resources or partnerships. I'm just worried about this report becoming a bit of an unruly beast. That report in and of itself is about a 6-page report that I could even, you know, resend it to the board now just to kind of refresh your memories on the discussion we had, and then, you know, we can dig into it a little bit further. I think first what we would have to do is understand where the majority of our overtime costs come from, which is explained in this report, what is already in place to manage it, and you know, which ones are contractually obligated and which ones are different than that. And so, you know, again, that report that we brought forward breaks all of that out. So, you know, I'm guessing, going back to the mayor's comments, if we are looking at doing a follow-up report to this, some sort of cost-benefit analysis, which would include potential savings in overtime, would be something that we would try and include in there. But I think the notion of what we do for managing overtime and what our overtime looks like now is probably a separate report and discussion rather than trying to lump it into this one, if that makes sense.
Okay. I guess my final comment and question, from what I'm hearing from the commissioner, is that there's an interest in seeing these different non-sworn officer positions as stepping stones, as we've heard already, and as part of representative and inclusive hiring. We've talked about that. Is that work already in progress, and is it being done separately, or could it somehow inform this report that's being requested?
Yeah, so that work is being done now, and I would say is being done aggressively in a lot of different areas. We upped our summer student program from 2 to 4 positions just a couple of years ago. We've enhanced our mentorship program. We're working on the Treaty 4 Citizen Police Academy. There's a whole bunch of things that we're doing right now to try and enhance that intake at other positions within the organization. In fact, our current mentors are in a position where we're looking for opportunity within the organization, even if it's not in a sworn capacity, so a sworn police officer capacity. Could we find a way in a civilian capacity that they could work, and then again use that as a stepping stone to get further into the organization if they're interested? So I do think that anytime we have a program, whether it's special constables or any sort of alternative delivery, our comm center is efficiently or effectively, a stepping stone for some people to become police officers. In the last year, we've hired 2 people out of our communications center to become police officers. So there's no question that any opportunities we have in alternative service delivery options could result in possibility for recruitment. Our community safety officer program, which is not the Regina Police program, but the City of Regina, could spawn future recruits for our police service. So I do think that that is a thing, but it comes back to what are we going to use, where are we going to find this efficiency in the organization, and what are we going to use it for? Can I just make a comment, and Mayor, I'll look to you. It's actually not with regard to the question. It's just a comment on Councillor Bresciani's response. Is that okay? I just want to, and maybe I don't need to say this, but I know Councillor Bresciani, you referred to the fact that this work is not easy and we need to innovate. I just need to say publicly, my work is never easy. And I'm not shy about hard work. I am not shy about rolling up my sleeves and digging into something. And as an organization, I feel like we have constantly looked for ways to innovate, and we will constantly look for ways to innovate going forward. So you're not looking at a police service, not just an executive, but a police service that looks for ways to avoid hard work. I believe that the work we do all the time is hard. And Councillor Bresciani, I'm not suggesting you were accusing that. I just want to say, it's not the hard work that we're afraid of, it's that I just don't know or see any clear opportunities right now where we could explore this option much further than we already do.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens, are you?
That's all I had for questions, but to Commissioner Bresciani, if you had any responses in terms of the variety of projects already underway and how this aligns with your motion, or whether it could be broken up, I'll leave it to you, but I look forward to hearing what other commissioners say.
Thanks. Commissioner Bushi, you have a question about the motion on the floor?
Absolutely, I do. Thank you, Mayor Masters, and thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Actually, some of my questions have been addressed here, and I thank you, Councillor Bresciani, for that motion. If you need a seconder, I can definitely second it later on. But my question is, in the reports, and first of all, I think that the report is not, for me, is not something that, it's going to take time, right? Saskatoon did their 1-year report. And another place that we can look at is also the city of Lethbridge as well. They have done quite an extensive work in terms of reimagining policing and sort of restructuring. But my question is, or I guess my comment to this report as well that Councillor Bresciani has brought forward is, can that report also include some barriers why we cannot have more community-based partnerships, or what are some of the barriers as well that we encounter in terms of, again, using, like Councillor Bresciani had mentioned, special, like less civilized, well, not civilized, sorry, civilian commissioners, police officers. I just wanted to know what are some of the barriers that we face here in Regina, as you know, in terms of partnership, building community-based partnership. But again, if nobody has a question, any other question, I can definitely second the motion.
Councillor, thank you, Commissioner Bushi. We don't need seconders on the motion, but thank you for that. Chief Bray, do you understand the question?
Yes, I do. I feel like we talked about that in this report. We did address what barriers and some challenges were. Again, this is a pretty broad topic, and so it's very tough to put together in a succinct report. This is a fairly long report as it is, and we tried to hit some high-level challenges that can be encountered, but I understand the addition that Commissioner Bushi is asking for, and so if we are going forward with this report, other than what is written in the report proper, it really is that cost-benefit analysis, and part of the cost-benefit analysis would be to identify barriers or challenges that exist, whether it be, overtime costs or a variety of different things. it's not that I don't understand it. I think I'm having a bit of a head scratch as to what else we're going to put in the report that isn't in this one. Maybe this one has got some more generalities in it, and we can give some specific numbers without relying on me to say 80% of the cost, 20% of the work. I know we've got those numbers from Saskatoon, for example. They sent it down, so we could come down, we could put something together that deeper analyzes that program and gives some understanding of whether or not that's an option for us here. I am also familiar, for example, with Lethbridge. Commissioner Boucher brought up Lethbridge. They have got some innovative things that are different than us, but we've got some innovative things that are markedly different than theirs as well. And a lot of it has to do with our proportion of civilian police personnel. We're roughly 2/3 civilian police personnel, and often we're able to use them to do a lot of the innovative things that Lethbridge is doing by hiring, whether it be a different tier of police officers or contracting outside people as well. But so, I think I understand. I'm just worried about the size of it, and ultimately that it's not going to say much different than what this report this morning has said.
So, Mayor Master, can I just follow up? So what my question is, I'm not necessarily looking at the cost and benefits. I'm also thinking about barriers as to why we are still behind in terms of hiring, our Indigenous, officers. I'm also looking at barriers that you face or the Commission faces in terms of maybe building more community partnerships, accessing services, right? So that we don't use, again, like we said, hire trained police officers to do work that almost any other police officers can do. So those are some of the barriers that I'm looking for. Cost and benefit is fine, but in terms of connectivity and sort of community-based or social issues, I should say, right? Those are kind of, and I think it's broad, like I said, and I'm fine with waiting for a year or how long. But again, this is not my motion, but thank you though for the response.
Chief, before you answer, can you advise us, you have an equity, diversity, and inclusion, a report coming up later this year. When would that report be coming?
It'll be before summer, I believe. I believe it's okay. Sometime between now and June. And
within that, we're just going to address some of the issues
right.
around barriers?
That's
okay.
correct.
So Commissioner Boucher, in terms of this motion and your motion about barriers to hiring, I think there's an equity, diversity, and inclusion report that's coming later into early summer, it sounds like, and that will be addressed, as opposed to making Commissioner Bresciani's motion become so massive as it'll be a year and a half from now that we get something back on it. So we've already got the barriers. In terms of the community partnerships, we've had multiple reports in terms of the number of organizations that the Police Commission or the RPS have relationships with. Perhaps we could send those out again. I think, Chief, with all due respect, this is a little bit the frustration of the Commission, is the understanding that you're responding to calls and burning up patrol time on issues that ultimately aren't yours. And so I think you're bearing a little bit of the frustration with a lack of services or coordinated access to service outside of policing. I think I just want to acknowledge that. I think in terms of even, what Councillor Stevens has brought up in terms of that coordinated access. So coordinated access to services is also part of the community safety wellbeing plan, as is community safety, as is problematic substance abuse, as is racism and anti-discrimination, domestic violence and intimate partner violence, and food security. You've been invited to all of those summits. And so we suspect that some of the work that again, that frustration with the community having access to services, when you're responding to call, clearly that they need access to services. And so I think there's a bridge that will exist here. Going back to Commissioner or Councillor Bresciani's motion is really that alternative response in where else could you look at tiered policing that you haven't possibly looked at to date, I think is what I'm understanding. Commissioner Bither, Commissioner Duncan, go ahead.
You hear me? Yeah, okay. Thanks so much for the report and the discussion so far. I'll be quick because I don't want to duplicate anything, but I'm I'm wondering, as part of the report, can there be an emphasis placed on the benefits to, if there are any perceived benefits to public health and safety? And so, obviously within cost savings that exists, but also expanding on efficiency. There's been discussion on improved service delivery. Councillor Berchiani mentioned even relatability of some officers. There has been recruitment and possible partnerships as benefits, but I guess I'm just kind of wondering, you know, cost savings are great, but how does the public benefit from this model and moving towards this mobilization? And I do appreciate a lot of the kind of nuanced thoughts in this report where McKenna has said that the success of tiered policing is still up for debate. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of explore that and what all the benefits to the public might be as well.
Yeah, I think that's an essential part of this for sure. In fact, if I think about the community support officers, that's part of what we were looking at is, number one, most of the work that they would be doing will be with people who are vulnerable and often dealing with complex social issues that may not require a police response. And often people that find themselves in that situation aren't comfortable interacting with police. So the benefit is you get a person who isn't comfortable with police and doesn't need police not getting police. They're getting someone who can deliver that service, get them to a shelter, show them where they can get some food, those types of things. So I think it's really an important part of this discussion is what's the benefit, not just the cost savings, but what is the benefit to the people that we're trying to serve. So again, if we're coming forward with a supplementary report, we can include that in here. I feel like often the benefit comes from it not being a police response or a police person doing it. It comes from leveraging a social worker, leveraging a mental health worker, someone who's trained, who's not a police officer, and who's not paid by the Regina Police Service, but because of an existing or good or new partnership, we're able to deliver a service just through that coordinated effort. So, you know, I do think that that's going to be a big part of the keys to the success of work that we will continue to do going forward, and I think that's something that's fairly easy to articulate as we're looking for opportunities here as well.
Yeah, and thanks so much for that. Again, I don't know for sure if there's data or numbers or metrics that can be used to justify what success looks like, but if there are any specific outcomes to articulate and kind of, you know, wrap in a package what that means and what that looks like when someone does receive a, you know, more of a compassionate approach. But yeah, just hoping to hear kind of more about the outcomes for sure.
I have a few questions, Chief and Inspector Seifeling. There's been some chat relative to this about the circumstance of York. Any ideas on their starting state compared to the Regina Police Service? Were they as advanced as you in terms of civilianization or anything else like that?
You know what, I don't know the answer to that, but after having watched the entire tiered policing, I feel like Chief Tanner could have easily been Chief Bray and Deputy Chief Ray and our police service presenting that as well, because what they did was they kind of gave their journey and gave an example of the innovative things that they've done to try and offset some of the costs, free up resources to the front line and find efficiencies. So I don't know the kind of the starting point with them and if they were markedly behind us, but I think police organizations in Canada, generally speaking, are all going through this evolution right now, especially in the last couple of years, and constantly looking for these efficiencies.
Okay. Inspector Seifeling, what is the primary goal of tiered policing?
To bring efficiencies, to identify different modern layers That's really what it comes down to. You're identifying within organizations those abilities to be efficient and how it can impact the safety of the community.
I sense your, you know what, with all due respect, I sense your frustration with producing a report that has taken you months to do, knowing that you've evolved over the past decade in terms of actually finding places and reporting on everything from patrol officer workload to strategy to civilianization, and continuing to find ways. So I sense your frustration. The only thing I'll say is that the organization of data, I think part of the problem that you're faced with your commission right now is that we see it in a report, put it in a table, and I think it'll hit home to the commission exactly how many levels of tiered policing we have comparative to some of the other places, whether that's Winnipeg or York or other places. We have a community safety patrol. We have actually a high ratio of civilianization. And I know in every budget you continue to ask for civilian positions as well as patrol officers to make that up. And if I went back 10 years, I suspect that the police officer to population rate, we've seen those charts before, we've fallen behind, in fact, in some respects because you focused on civilianization to free up patrol officers' time, and that's appreciated. Yeah. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Like we got PACT, you got HUB, you've got evidence, you've got armorers, you've got it. And as much as I cringe at making you do the work, I think it would be important for the commission and probably the public to understand exactly how far along in tiered policing you are already. Is that fair, Chief?
Yeah, and ultimately, we need the board to understand. And so if a supplementary report with some additional information will help, what I would suggest maybe we could do is a couple of things. We could add some other potential reports as appendixes. So for example, the overtime analysis report, the partnership and collaboration report that we recently gave to the board, rather than trying to weave it all into the report, perhaps we could just attach them as appendixes that we could refer to and really just do a bit of an analysis of what's going on in Saskatoon with their auxiliary program and maybe a little bit more of a kind of a, I guess, cost-benefit analysis laid out a little in a little more black and white fashion to understand that, and maybe dig a little bit deeper into specific areas and meter out what some of those barriers could be to, for example, having a tiered police response in investigative services, for example. Why is that a challenge, or why is there no opportunity for that there, and kind of spell that out a little bit more. I mean, ultimately, it's not enough that our administration knows, I guess is what I'm saying. I need the board to understand as well, and so we'll try and take all of this back based on the wording of the motion and the feedback that we've had from the board here, and see if we can't bring you a report with a little more detail towards the end of the year. I do think that the work of that community safety and well-being move is really going to probably answer a lot of these questions as well, but you know the timing of that better certainly than I do.
Thanks, Chief. Inspector Seiferlin, thank you very much for the work you and Amy Belfer have put into the report. And yeah, we'll work harder at understanding with a bit more data in front of us. Thanks. The motion on the floor is before you. Commission, all those in favor? Actually, I guess I'll ask. Any opposed?
sorry, do I not get to,
We don't close off debate at commission. Councillor Bresciani, do you have further questions?
yeah, I would like to just say this, that I, I don't think, I don't think it's that we don't understand. We absolutely appreciate the work that's been done by the Regina Police Service. So I kind of take that in, it's not that we don't understand. People who have been here a long time understand all the work that's been done. So if you put it in a chart, you put it in a graph, you put it in whatever, I respect all of that. I guess my point in this motion is the fact that when we look at this, we're always looking for opportunities that come arise, and we've heard that staff do. But, you know, when we look at we've been talking about overtime for probably 30 years. We've been talking about all of these things so where do we move forward? So I would appreciate the Saskatoon report that comes back. And I think, Chief, you are innovative. You're an out of the box thinker, so I appreciate that. So I don't want it to be that we don't understand. I don't think that's accurate. We do understand, and we appreciate everything that's been done. But my concern is that if we just sit here and say, well, we've done all we can, that frustrates me. So I think we can always do more, and that's what I'm looking for. So I'll leave it there. But I think sometimes the word tiered policing, I think, scares people. I think that's the bigger conversation here, and that's not what it should be. It's about how can we find efficiencies with what we're doing, and every organization should be going through an efficiency review. If that's what the next step is later down the road, fine. But this is some shortcomings that I'm asking for, and I honestly don't think it's too much to ask for that in a report. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Any opposed to the motion on the floor? Seeing none, carried. Going back to the original report, do any members of the commission have any questions on the main report? Seeing none, we have a receive and file motion on the floor. All right, Elaine says we don't need a receive and file, so moving on. PO 22-7, monthly crime statistics, January 22nd, 2022, sorry. Chief, could I have you introduce the report?
Sure, thank you very much, Mayor Masters. So this is a couple times a year we touch base with regard to our crime stats. Once we give you a bit of a mid-year update as to where things are at, and then after a full year is complete, we do, after we've kind of reconciled all of the stats and the reports, we give you a snapshot of what the year looked like compared to the past decade. And so we've got Ms. Karen Williams with us today from Strategic Services. Karen is the mastermind behind many of our statistical reports like this, and Karen's going to walk us through this morning's report.
Good morning to Mayor Masters, members of the board, and to the public that are present. So as the chief mentioned, twice each year, once at mid-year and once at year-end, the Regina Police Service provides an analysis of police-reported crimes in Regina over a 10-year period. From this report looks at January 1st to December 31st for 2012 through 2021. We gather data in the same manner each year, allowing for reliable analysis of crime within the city over time. So starting at total crime, there was an increase of 3% in total crime reported to Regina Police Service in 2021 compared to 2020, and less than 1% more compared to 2012. Included in total crime are crimes against the person, property, and other criminal code violations. Looking at crimes against the person, the 3,029 reported occurrences in 2021 were a 2% increase compared to 2020 and 8% more than in 2012. Crimes against the person count the number of victims of violent violations. In 2021, there were 15 homicides, a 4-victim increase from the previous year. Homicides have risen over the last 3 years, reaching their highest level in over a decade. There were 4 female victims and 11 male victims ranging in age from 2 to 52. 7 of the homicides involved a firearm and 4 involved an edged weapon. 11 of the homicides appeared to be associated to risk factors such as drug trafficking, illegal activity, and gang association. In 2021, there were also 20 attempted murders reported, though this number has decreased since its peak in 2019. When compared to 10 years ago, the number of homicides and attempted murders has more than doubled. There was a 4% increase in total assaults reported in 2021 compared to 2020, and a marginal increase when compared to 2012. The total number of assaults has remained relatively consistent over 10 years, with assaults level 2 and 3 increasing over the last few years. There were 207 sexual assaults reported in 2021 compared to the prior year's average of 153, with a 7% increase from the previous year and a 70% increase from 2012. There were 102 other sex crime offenses in 2021, which was higher than the previous year's average of 48 offenses. The 266 robberies in 2021 were greater than the prior year's average of 255. While the overall trend of robberies decreased, commercial robberies increased. Convenience stores and gas stations, as well as cigarette, marijuana, and liquor stores appeared to be frequent targets. The 22 reported occurrences of kidnapping and forcible confinement in 2021 were elevated compared to the prior year average of 15. The reported criminal harassment, commonly known as stalking, occurrences in 2021 were slightly above the prior year's average of 22. The next two charts are a new addition for 2021, highlighting some increasing trends in our community. So starting with section 162.1 of the Criminal Code being added in 2015, it made it illegal to share sexually explicit images without the consent of the person depicted in them. When compared to the previous year's average of 4 occurrences, this offense was elevated in 2021. The number of extortion incidents reported to police continues to increase across Canada. In Regina, in 2021, more than 90% of the reported extortion crimes followed a specific pattern involving social media, an ad request or message from an unknown person, with the unknown person establishing false trust by sharing intimate images or videos to urge a victim to reveal theirs. The anonymous individual will record and threaten to disclose the victim's private images or videos to the victim's social media connections, family, and friends unless they provide money. Frequently, these cases are involving young persons, embarrassment, and a hesitation to report or seek help. Extortion was more common than in previous years in 2021, with a prior average of 6 occurrences. Moving on to crimes against property, compared to 2020, there was a 2% increase in property crimes, with 10,720 occurrences, and a 3% increase when compared to 10 years prior. Opportunities for criminals may have continued to be altered by changes due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There was an 11% increase in theft of motor vehicle in 2021 compared to 2020, and 9% less than in 2012. There was just a 1% increase in theft in 2021 compared to 2020, and also 1% less than in 2012. There was a notable 62% increase in theft of packages. There were 10% more break-and enters in 2021 compared to 2020, and 25% more compared to 2012. From 2021 to 2020, residential break-and enters increased by 4%, businesses decreased by 6%, and others increased by 20%. There were 3% less reported mischief and willful damage occurrences in 2021 than in 2020, and 17% fewer than in 2012. Moving on to arson, the 315 reported occurrences in 2021 were greater than the 133 average from 2012 to 2020. According to the arson investigator, individuals breaking into abandoned houses and starting fires to remain warm or potentially purposefully igniting them was a pattern seen in 2021. Several of these occurrences look to be related to homelessness and substance use. In some cases, the same addresses were set ablaze several times. Also, overflowing dumpsters and bins were frequently an arson target, yet there was often a lack of witnesses or evidence to move investigations forward in these cases. Aside from the typical profile of young people, more adults have been observed setting fires. Compared to 5 years ago, there has also been a 71% increase in online reporting of arson. Looking at other criminal code violations, there were 2% more occurrences of other criminal code violations in 2021 compared to 2020, and 8% fewer compared to 2012. Approximately 88% of other criminal code violations were procedural offenses. These include offenses such as breaking a curfew or not attending court. There were 6% more procedural offenses in 2021 compared to 2020, and 8% less than in 2012. In regards to Controlled Drug and Substance Act offenses, there were 40% less occurrences in 2021 compared to 2020, and 54% less than in 2012. New direction from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada in August 2020 has led to a reduction in the number of simple possession charges laid by the police. These guidelines balance the realities of the health impacts of substance use and direct police to lay possession charges only where they are the most serious manifestations of these offenses. The number and amount of drug seizures in Regina continues to increase, and we continue to target high-level traffickers in our investigations. There were 5% less criminal code traffic violations in 2021 compared to 2020, and 20% less than in 2012. Despite this year-over-year decrease, there were increases seen in dangerous operation of a motor vehicle, impaired driving by drugs, and failure to stop causing bodily harm. There were 8% more traffic tickets issued in 2021 than in 2020, but 51% less than in 2012. Looking at automated speed enforcement, there were 29% less tickets issued in 2021 compared to 2020, and combining both of these categories, there were 16% less tickets issued in 21 compared to 2020, and 8% more compared to 10 years prior. In terms of calls for service, there were 4% less calls for service in 2021 compared to 2020, and 2% more compared to 2012. And alarm calls for service, there were 4% less in 2021 compared to 2020, and a 68% decrease compared to 2012. Enhanced call verification was implemented as of January 1st, 2019. This requires alarm companies to verify the validity of an intrusion alarm before requesting police attendance. This additional accountability on alarm companies resulted in a significant decrease in 2019 in the number of alarm calls for service, and this may be still impacting the decreases seen in 2020 and 2021. So just a recap, in conclusion, there were 18,552 total police reported crimes in 2021, which was 3% more than the previous year and 0.5% higher when compared to 10 years earlier. Crimes against the person, property, and other criminal code offenses all increased slightly by 2% over the previous year. Regina faced another year of COVID-19 waves with vaccine advancements, periodic restrictions, and remaining uncertainties. The pandemic appears to have continued to impact crime trends in Regina in 21 with marginal increases in crime. The question of whether Regina's crime rate will return to pre-COVID levels or continue to evolve into a new environment remains unanswered. Changes to crime, social disorder, and an ongoing need for adaptive police responses continue to be reported across the country. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can I have a motion to receive and file prior to questions? Thanks, Councillor Stevens. Any members of the commission have any questions? Thank you. Councillor Stevens, go for it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report and the update. I have some questions about page 4, the sexual offenses specifically. I understand the numbers, but I guess I'm looking for a why behind this. I find this one particularly troublesome. certainly there's been an increase since 2012. Can you say anything about the rate? The population has grown. Has the rate of sexual offenses compared to population changed or stayed steady over that time frame? Can you comment on that?
I'm going to look to Karen for that specific question.
It's hard to say why exactly. It's hard to pinpoint causation and to say this is why it's increasing. Something that we know through the General Social Survey, through Statistics Canada, is that sexual assaults are one of the are the most underreported crime. From the survey on victimization that they did in 2019, they concluded that 6% of sexual assaults come to the attention of police, and so we know that they're greatly unreported. A possible explanation could be that discourse has led to an increase in reporting. That's a hopeful outlook. It could be other reasons. It could be an increase in our community, but it's really challenging to pinpoint one exact reason and say with confidence this is the reason why.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, are you able to comment on the rate? So you take the population from a decade ago and where we were at in stats versus where we are now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these aren't rates, they're counts. So it's this doesn't factor in the population in these numbers specifically, but an increasing population could also lead to an increase in criminal offenses in our community as well, for sure.
Might it be possible to, in future reports, include rates? That matters just as much, so we could see if a rate is going up or down, that would signal something different than just the numbers themselves. But I appreciate it as it is. I guess my question, this is likely for the chief. Domestic violence, of which we could consider sexual assault and offenses as part of that discourse, is a target of the community wellness strategy at the city. What are some opportunities for overlap? How do we deal with these very troublesome numbers of sexual offenses with the community well-being strategy, which talks about domestic violence?
Yeah, so I think you're right. There's lots of opportunities. The work that we do with regard to domestic conflict, really it's about that support that can be provided and ultimately digging into what the underlying social issue is that's causing the challenges. So we've made some significant changes to our response to domestic conflict over the last 4 or 5 years. In fact, when we rebranded and relaunched back in about 2017, 2018, we were told by experts in domestic conflict that we had one of the most progressive, not only policies and procedures, but resources and what we put out in terms of our website and the connections that are there and the thought that's gone into it anywhere in Canada. And really, you're right, it's about linking to partners. So if I look at sexual assault specifically, the Violence Against Women Advocate Case Review that we're doing is a significant way in which we're building and strengthening our relationship with Regina Sexual Assault Center and Sexual Assault Services Saskatchewan. Both of those organizations work with survivors of sexual violence to try and limit the ongoing trauma and continued victimization from the incident that happened, but they also work proactively to try and provide meaningful education and communication in a way that prevents or helps people take themselves out of a situation that potentially could be dangerous. And so that is part of the ongoing work that we do. So I specifically haven't given you maybe an example of what I see, but other than to say I think that community well-being work that is going on is really specifically focused on dovetailing services that other agencies provide in areas of domestic conflict and work that we can do. So I'll give you one other quick example is we work with the Provincial Association of Transition Houses and with the provincial government on Clare's Law. And so Clare's Law is a whole new piece of legislation that allows people to early identify in a relationship if they are at risk, and that integrates our work with our police service and other partners and of course provides them literally a handoff with support services that can ensure their safety as well. So there is a lot of work that goes on continually in this area. You're right to say there is a bit of a connection between sexual offenses and domestic offenses. It's not always that case, but there is a connection, and I think any continued work we can do through the well-being project is going to be helpful in enhancing that service delivery, essentially.
Okay, thank you. My last question is about the homicide figures. Can you say anything that would generalize why we have this terrible reputation in reality in Regina? Are these crimes of passion? Are they gang-related? Are people being targeted? Is there any way to summarize the background to homicides in Regina?
So I just was in Winnipeg yesterday, and they had their 9th homicide for 2022 in Winnipeg. So I'm not trying to diminish our numbers, but I can tell you that homicides are a problem in certainly in prairie Canadian cities. We see it in Saskatoon, Regina, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Calgary for sure. I've talked about this in the media a few times, and I'll say this and then I'll look to see if anyone has anything else to add. But predominantly, a large number of our homicides fall into a couple of different categories. One of them is drug-related offenses, and so it may be that there's a gang connection as well, but often there's some sort of an affiliation with drugs and domestic conflict. And so domestic conflict isn't always husband-wife in the traditional sense. It can be exes, it can be family relationships of different sorts, brother, sister, you name it, right? There's lots of different ways. So I would say often it's a lot of people want to be able to point and say it's gang related. There is a segment of it that are gang related, but if we peel it back even further, often it falls into one of those two categories: drugs or some sort of a domestic relationship. Anybody have anything to add to that?
I'm not sure there's much more I can give you, Councillor Stevens. It is mostly driven by drugs and dysfunction within families, dysfunction that we're seeing in the community. We can look at poverty. Lots of the related issues that we talk about all the time are definitely underlying causes that lead to the dysfunction in the families, that lead to the disputes that often lead to homicides. So I think that's, Chief has covered it pretty much with all of his comments as well.
Thank you very much.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to Karen based on what Councillor Stevens asked? I was trying to read you when he asked the question about including rates. How hard is that to do?
So typically we do that when we do our CCJS stats at mid-year. But we could look into adding some rates to add some context. That's also done at the census metropolitan level. We could look at having some rates at the city level added to reports.
We'll look at it.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Commissioner Boucher.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for the reports. I hate to nitpick each section, but I think that's kind of what I'm doing. Something that stood up to me is the rates of arsons. We went from 60 in 2012 to 315 in 2021. I mean, if you walk through downtown and some parts of our city, you see lots of burnt down houses and abandoned houses. Another area as well is the non-consensual distribution of intimate images. Again, 0 from 2012 to 2015 to 16 just last year. And I know with the non-consensual distribution, you have mentioned that it usually involves young people. But Mike, I wanted to ask, in terms of the demographics, like are women, women and men, I'm just wondering, the victims of non-consensual distribution, what rates or what number are women or girls in comparison to other genders? And same with arsons as well. Does it involve young people or like, I just want to know the age range, or do you have that information?
Do you have anything on that, Karen?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So I can speak to, not so much for arsons, but for the non-consensual distribution of intimate images. Just looking at our data set, that was typically women were victims of that most often. And looking at the extortion cases, those victims were actually typically young men, but in both cases, it does affect both genders, but those were the main trends observed in our data. And it did affect young people at a greater rate, but it does affect people of all ages as well.
And so with regard to the arson question, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief Ray.
Thanks for your question, Councillor, or Commissioner. As far as arsons go, predominantly we're seeing essentially two types of arsons. There's the structure fire arsons, and then there's the bin fire ones. A lot of the bin fire ones I would likely attribute to younger people setting those ablaze and then moving on. And oftentimes we see a number of them over the course of an evening. We work with fire on those, and it's sometimes very difficult to come to a conclusion on who's responsible, but we do work with them, and that's part of the role of our arson coordinator to do those. The structured fires, we have seen an increase in those for sure. I would say some of that's attributable to, for the most part, likely adults who are looking for places to go in winter when it's colder out, and they go into a home, or they're in a home. We've even had some where there's been no services there, no electricity or no gas, and they start fires for warmth, and then oftentimes they take off from there, and it becomes a residential fire. We also have a few where these homes are broke into, and there's a fire that started as a true arson, I would say, in those. And again, those are younger people, but adults that are looking either for committing a crime or doing some other things, and then the arson is a fact that happens after they're done what they're doing. So there's a number of different individuals that are out there. It's very, I would say, very scattered throughout our community. It doesn't just happen in one particular area, but there's a number of them that are occurring. But we're seeing an increase in the adult involvement, and I think it's to do with looking for places to go, sometimes crimes of opportunity as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And just one more follow-up question too, in terms of the increase in adult involvement. Do you think that it could be as a result of, say, homelessness and people don't have a place to stay? Is that what you're saying? And do you think that say if this city provides some sort of shelter or permanent shelter or some sort of alternative, do you think that could have an effect in reducing the number of arsons?
It may have an effect. I don't know what the total correlation is between the homelessness and those starting the fires. I'm not sure what the correlation is. It may have an effect. Oftentimes we have individuals go into a house, and sometimes we're referred to as a flop house, where there's lots of drug activity and things like that. If they're cold, there's fires that sometimes get started and those things burn. And we've had other instances like that that are problematic. I don't know if it's all homelessness related. I think it's people that are, oftentimes with addiction issues and other challenges in our community that are there as well.
Thank you, Deputy Chief.
Thank you. Any other member of the commission have any questions? I just have one. In terms of the homicide rate, it's noted in the report that 7 were firearms related and 4 were edged weapons or knives or some very sharp edged instrument, I understand. How is that, if you were to look back or reflect back, 7 homicides, or roughly 70%, 67% of homicides being performed with a firearm, has that changed over the years?
Yeah, I would say it definitely has changed how homicides are being committed. The proportion of them that are being committed with a firearm, for example, is something I think it's safe to say over time it's replacing edged weapons. We saw more edged weapons being used in homicides. This is part of the discussion that we've had in the last 3 or 4 years on the number of attempt murders, because an attempt murder when the weapon used is, or sorry, an assault when a weapon used is a firearm has different consequences, and your intention can be different than when you get into a fist fight. And so there was 1 year where we had 35 attempt murders, but we had a high number of violent offenses where a firearm was used. And so it's easy to draw the conclusion that if I'm going to discharge a firearm at you, I intend those consequences to be fairly serious, and that's why you see an attempt murder charge. So we've typically seen, I'm just giving you anecdotally in the last 20 years, a real transition from predominantly edged weapons being used in an offense to now more firearms being used, and that's a trend that is significantly consistent across Canada.
Thank you. And thanks for the report. We have a motion to receive and file on the floor. Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. And now we move on to PO 22-7, the monthly crime statistics for January 2022. Chief, is this yours?
Sure it is. So this is just a brief update as to where we're at here in the first month of the year, keeping in mind this, although it's March 1st today, this is technically our February board meeting. So we're always working a month behind on the crime stats. So early in the year, we're seeing a couple of areas where we're either up or down. Crimes against property, we've got a small increase of 2%. I always talk about this early in the year, but our crime stats early in the year can be affected by, it can look like a large percentage, but it's only a low number. So just kind of ask you to keep that in mind. If you had 2 offenses last year and we've had 4 this year, percentage-wise, it looks like it's a significant increase, whereas it might only be statistically a number or 2 more. Our theft of auto rates are down a bit, 15 incidents, which equates to 17.2% from where we were last year. If we look at crimes against person, we're about 16% down from where we were last year. We have seen a bit of an increase in robberies in the early part of the year, and so if we put both of the categories together, crimes against the person, crimes against property, we're at about 2.2% lower than where we were at this time last year. At the back of this report, we've got a couple of charts there for you to take a look at, basically dashboards that show where things are at with the drug overdoses, and then our monthly and daily dashboards that give you the breakdown in a few of the categories that we followed over the last couple of years: missing people, suicides, drug seizures, domestics, and traffic stops. That's my update for today. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Chief. Could I get a motion to receive and file the report, please? Thank you. Commissioner Yee, any questions on the stats for January from members of the commission? Seeing none, I'll ask if there's any opposed to receive and file. Seeing none, carried. PO 22-8, Canadian Association of Police Governance Annual Membership Renewal. I think, Elaine, is this yours?
It is, the communication that's on there is really quite self-explanatory. Every year, the board for the last several years has been a member of the CAPG, Canadian Association of Police Governance. It's time to renew membership this year, and just looking for a recommendation of whether you want to renew the membership.
Thank you. So, is there any discussion from anyone, or you want to make a motion to renew the membership? Commissioner Yee, go ahead.
Well, just seeing how I'm a director on the CAPG, I think it'd be good governance to renew our membership.
All right. We have a motion to renew the board members' membership in CAPG for 2022. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Can I have a motion for private session, please? Thank you, Commissioner Bither. We are going to recess for 15 minutes, maybe more like 20, Chief. We'll see you back here at 11:15. Thanks very much.